Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show, it's about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Watch. A great episode, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. We have the whole situation of the head of the Thieves Guild getting killed by their dragon, which I didn't even think about it at the time, because I keep forgetting. It's like, right, they make a whole point about the noble dragon goes after virgins, and I was like, all right, because the head of the Assassin's Guild, she constantly cracks on the fact is that the head of the Thieves Guild was a virgin, but obviously you also have like the imp who's recording the whole situation, or rather, recreated everything. I guess like it's like the imps more so like capture things by drawing them, and it's like, oh, and Lady Ramkin's like, oh, look at all of this, oh, it's so amazing and stuff what you did, but she's like, this is BS, because there's no way you could have gotten all these degrees of an angle just drawing. So it's like, yeah, we all know that, everyone knows that if you give them imps like two mice or whatever, they'll fabricate whatever you want them to. Everyone knows that, right? And then Sherry and Sam are looking at each other like, man, that's a real flaw in the system, isn't it? Like, I love that it took Lady Rampkin to point out something that seems like it should make sense, that like, oh, they can be bribed, and it's like, oh, I guess the system is flawed, that we haven't really thought about too much. But it's like, well, I guess it also benefits him, because it's like, well, we don't have to arrest him now, because that would have led to a whole catastrophe of, led to the war that they were trying to avoid anyway. So it's like, hey, it worked out in the end. But Sherry, ends up having to tell Sam about the darkness within the darkness. And so at the same time, obviously there's the whole Anguia and Carrot situation of like, deciding where they put everybody. I didn't love her threatening everyone. Carrot's like, no, we got to separate them, put them in different cells. That way they won't talk to each other. And she pulls out a knife. It's like, okay, no, we can put them in the same cell. We don't have to worry about them talking. We cut out their tongues. And she pulls out her knife, and the dude starts talking. I love that the other dude hits him later on. Like, what the hell are you doing? He's kind of like, whatever, dude. I'm not about to get my damn tongue cut out. It's like, well, that was super effective. I also love him like kind of checking Anguia out, and she's like, what are you looking at? And he was like, oh, your tattoo, it must be from your other pack. He's like, you could get another tattoo of your new pack. And it's like, oh, I guess it's a lot. I mean, maybe he was legitimately just checking out the tattooing, but I think it was also him just like checking her out. Just like, I was like, wow, you were staring her down. You got it hard for you're super into Anguia, dude. It's crazy. I even love that moment later on when it's like, okay, when the plan was, everybody divide and conquer, like, because eventually it's like, oh, the Thieves Guild, they're going to, the Assassin's Guild is actually going to come and break the Thieves Guild people out, because she's going to, the head of the Assassin's Guild is going to take over that. And I also love them being like, oh, what's that going to be, like some kind of super guild? And it's like, well, what are they even going to be? And then Lady Rapkin's like, the Assassins. So it's got a nice ring to it. And so Sam is like, all right, so me and Lady Rampkin are going to stay here to hold down the fort. You three go after Carcer, as well as go after this crown that's in, the mines. And we kind of get a breakdown from Sherry about how everything works. It's like, yeah, I escaped 5 years ago. And he was like, Carrot's like, whoa, I thought you left. And it's like, well, there's no leaving. It's just, it was like a legitimate having to escape. We still don't know the ins and outs of understanding why that whole, like, the mine situation worked the way it, I guess it was just like the society just kind of there. I guess it's like its own society, kind of like, you'd almost think this was supposed to be kind of a like play on, not necessarily play, but almost like a fictitious version of like an Amish community. It seems like that might be, especially, I think that's what it seemed like, or it might not even just necessarily have to be Amish, but it's just like a community that's kind of kept themselves separate from the rest of the world. But like, I feel like you can kind of see some, like, obviously this is like a more fantastical version of it, but I think it's supposed to be kind of almost like a parallel to that, which I didn't think about it just now. But Sherry does, don the beard again and everything. I also love the whole thing with Spike, and she's like, yeah, I think he's kind of falling. I'm going to have to, like, keep him at bay, because he's kind of falling for me, because it's just like, you stay here, Spike, don't follow me. You hear me? And like, yes, mistress, I won't follow you. But it's like, apparently the reason why they have the beards in the mines, why that's such an important thing, because you can't be different in the mine. Everyone has to be the same. No males, no females. You can't stand out, because if you do, if you're different, the darkness will come and get you. And it got Sherry's mom a couple years ago. And so that's even more so why Sherry's, so, I mean, well, to be fair, you grow up in that community. You're built, like, the fear is built in you, with all of that. But, I also love, it was actually a cute moment between Anguia and Carrot, where it's like, it's like, well, you two are going to need beards too. And it's like, well, the prisoners are here. And they say it at the same time and they look at each other. I was like, oh, that's super adorable. So there's that. Then there's the Sam and Lady Anguia situation. Not Lady Ramkin situation. And it's all about she gives him the whistle. She's like, if anything ever goes wrong, this whistle will let you, summon Good Boy. And it's like, oh, he remembers it from the vision he saw of the future. And it's like, okay, I've seen this before. But before I really had any chance to really talk about it, the Assassin's Guild shows up. And I love they're having this conversation. It's like, when are they supposed to be here? Oh, no, they said soon. And they should have given us a specific time while they're sneaking in stealthily in the background. And then I also love, it's like, oh, like, you can't hurt us. We're part of the Musicians Guild. Actually, they kicked you out because they heard Lady Ramkin singing and it was terrible. And she's like, what? I felt that was, and I love that the gag of the entire episode, shitting on her singing. And it's like, no, my singing was good. And it's, it's like, what? And she was super offended by that. So, and Good Boy won't burn them for whatever reason. I guess Good Boy's kind of like doing that singing thing, which I'm assuming that has something to do with the Noble Dragon. That might be a key point. Because the moment, like, Good Boy was singing like a couple episode or two back, so it's like, okay, what's that about? Like, it feels like that's building up to something. What necessarily? I don't know. But when the time came, Lady Ramkin was about ready. It would have been cool if she was able to burn them all, but nope. So they go on the run. They go into the cell where the Skimmer's at with all those. It's like, oh yeah, this is where Sherry does all her like heavy experiments, and they go in there, and there's a whole bunch of mannequins. I'm like, is those experiments just like different outfits and how they look or something? Like, I don't know. Because we never got to see, like, what experiments, or maybe the mannequins are supposed to be test dummies. Maybe, like, what outfits look fabulous. Or maybe it's just simply like, I do test stuff. I don't know. It's just like, all we got was the creepy mannequins, because even Lady Ramkin, like, oh, there are a lot of mannequins in here. And Skimmer's flipping out because he's like, oh my god, they're alive or whatever. I also love, on their way to the mine, Sherry and, Anguia and Carrot are back there, like, stroking their beards and just, like, having fun. And I'm like, look at these two looking so cute and adorable together. I love it. But when they actually get to the mine, I love the whole thing about, like, Sherry's like, oh, I told you not to call me by my name. Not only because it takes literally 6 minutes to say, but it's like, I'm here for the crown. And obviously it's like, well, you're going to listen to me because I'm the authority figure. And then Sherry proceeds to say her name. And then it's like 6 minutes later. And it's just kind of like, all right, we're still at this standstill. And it's like, finishes her name the second. I love that. It's just like, I also thought was really interesting too. We find out that Sherry's dad died. They never really got specific, so I'm wondering, is it like about 5 years ago when she escaped that her dad died? Because it's like, oh, your dad died of like a broken heart. So Spike, which we now know, it's like, hey, that's what you name our goblin friend. And it's like, oh, I guess, and with the circumstances, it's like, oh, that must have been your old love. Like there was something there. Granted, the circumstances changed over the course of the episode, but it's like, this was someone that was very important to you. So I guess that's why you used to name Spike when naming their goblin friend. But it's like, yeah, we're here because of that Nari. We're here for the crown. It's like, all right, cool. But it turns out like Spike was also one of those people that wanted to run away too, but it was only enough time for Sherry to get away. And it's like, because Sherry never came back all these years, understandably so, because it's like, once you got out, like she was afraid, like if she came back, it'd mean, that if she came back, she's afraid she probably wouldn't have been able to escape this place, because in this place, essentially, you lose all sense of yourself. Like in this world, in this place, you're not meant to ask too many questions because, that's what attracts the darkness is, once again, you're standing out. You're supposed to be uniform. You're supposed to kind of think the same and not ask too many questions or be different. It's kind of the point. No one's supposed to stand out. So, and you can see where like that would, stifle someone like Sherry, who is just very, about just embracing who she is. So, but obviously that leads to like Spike kind of resenting her to the point it's like, oh, I've handed the crown over to Carcer and Wants, which it also turns out we found the final artifact. Oh, it turns out it's Carrot, which that's a whole thing. Because basically the sorcerer who created the sword created this whole situation to make it so you could control the noble dragon, basically, obviously we know, gave the artifacts to different people, but also apparently it's in their bloodline. The final artifact is in a particular family's. Well, apparently Carrot is a descendant of that, which I also love the whole Gawain thing too. He's like, well, we're not going to go along with this. And it's like, oh yeah, I go where the work is. And he's like, what about the whole love thing? It's like, you had an opportunity right before you died to kind of make something happen between you and the wolf chick that you have a thing for, but you didn't. And it's like, now would be an opportunity for you to kind of, I forgot what the exact wording was, but basically it was like, get it on. And then once turns and looks around, and Carson's looking at Gawain like, do you want me to put you back in the fire? He's like, no, fine. Dickhead. I love that because he was like earlier, he's like, oh, you can't burn me. I was forged in the fire. I will tame it. Ow, shit, that's hot. All right, fine, dickhead. I love that insult. I don't know why. I love that Gawain has a personality and everything. It's amazing. But I thought that was interesting, the whole Carrot situation. At the same time, Anguia and Sherry were kind of, left to be consumed by the dark. And Anguilla was like, it's fine, she's always preferred the dark because that meant no moon. And so she was ready. She's like, no matter how deep the darkness, I'll find you. But Sherry was like, no, take me. And the darkness ends up consuming her. But the darkness isn't what she thought it was. And I like that because I basically see all these different versions of Sherry. It's like, and it's so weird to see the actor who plays Sherry without the long hair because I'm so used to it now. So seeing the actor with short hair, I was like, what? Oh, it's so weird to see you, like, not with long hair. It threw me off for a second. If I ever see that actor in, like, anything else and just, like, see them out and about, not as Sherry, it's going to be weird because I'm so used to seeing you because my first introduction to you is as Sherry with long hair, so it's like seeing you without it's just going to throw me off. I have that from actors from time to time. Like, I've talked about it before, like Rose McIver. It's so weird to see her with non-blonde, platinum hair because I'm so used to seeing her with platinum hair as Liv. So when I see her with, like, what I think she's a natural blonde, she might not be. She might be a natural brunette, but like when I see her with blonde hair, because I think more often I've seen her as a blonde, it's weird because I'm so not used to it. But regardless, that's a tangent. But it turns out like the darkness isn't an enemy; it's an ally. I guess because because of the way, because we never found out like why the darkness is the way it is. Like maybe like the darkness always lived there, and they decided to create their community there. Or maybe it was buried deep within, and maybe like, when they were mining over the generations, that community, when they were mining, they awakened to darkness, and they think it's something, to consume you. But Sherry's mom is like, no, it's actually, we got to stop perpetuating this lie that it's some evil, that you're basically, when you're consumed by the darkness, that it's punishing you for being different. It's like, no, it's actually embracing it, because inside the darkness is basically infinite possibilities. It's a multiverse, and the different Sherrys we were seeing were all the Sherrys from the different, like all the different versions of Sherrys, like all who you could be in these different worlds and these different lives. Like, oh, we're heavily lean. I mean, not just in this case, but I mean the entire like show in general, we are heavily leaning into the multiverse, which I would say that's kind of interesting, like leaning into it from the beginning, considering like most things have to build up to a multiverse. So for you to be starting off in the multiverse, I think that's so interesting. But it's like, you, my dear, can control it. And it's like, what about you, Mom? It's like, oh, I still got like all these other worlds to check out, but I will find you again, my sweet, And so Sherry comes out, has complete control of the darkness. I was like, yo, this is sick. That's awesome. Sherry just like popping out of it, like the darkness coming after them, and ends up, getting Anguilla and Carrot out of there. And sadly, Wants and Carson were able to get away beforehand, because Sherry just popping out and being like, you're under arrest. I was like, yeah, with your darkness power. I'm so stupid. I've been sitting here saying that the entire time. It never crossed my mind to actually think about the darkness. That being is that... that's a Dark Horse comic, isn't it? I don't remember what comic book publication that's on. I want to say Dark Horse, but I was about to say Vertigo. I don't think it's Vertigo, is it? I think it's Dark Horse, but I could be mistaken. Whatever. It made me immediately think of that. If you didn't know, this was also... I'm surprised they haven't touched that property live action wise. I know it's been adapted into a video game, but I'm surprised that hasn't ever been tackled into a TV show or a movie at this point. I personally would prefer a TV show. I might do a whole video about that. Regardless, I'm going off sidetrack, but it made me think of that because the premise behind that is basically like a dude who's basically part of a mafia family ends up getting control of a being, and he gets controlled by the darkness he's able to use. It's kind of similar to what Sherry is doing. Granted, probably a little bloodier, a little scarier, but it just kind of made me think of that. But it's like, hey, like, we don't have to live this way. We can just be, the darkness isn't something to be afraid of. It's about embracing who you are. We can be whoever we want to be. And Spike is like, you want me to start a revolution? And she's like, yeah, I like the sound of that. Start a revolution for me. And Spike kisses her, and she's like, ugh. At first I thought she was going to say like, oh, because of the beard, but it's like, yeah, you just try to leave me to be killed by the darkness. And it's almost like, yeah, that's true. I can't believe I expected something to happen between us. Yeah. So it's kind of a bummer, but Sherry was able to kind of bring change, also confronting her greatest fears and her past in that regard. So there's that side of things. Then we have more with Sam and Lady Ramkin. The whole thing about, it's like, oh, he's looking really red. It's like, no, he's always red. Here, what about the moisture? Didn't I tell you to moisturize? He was like, no, I'm not going to. She's like, let me. He's like, no, you're not going to moisturize me, especially not in front of him. And Skimmer being like, I don't mind. And then she starts putting it on him. And he's like, can I get some? And she was like, you murdered my parents. He was like, right, sorry, forgot. But it's like, oh, look at it. That moisturizer took days off of you already. But I also appreciate him being super sweet about it, like constantly complimenting her. It's like, they're talking about my singing. It's like, oh, I think you have a beautiful voice. And she's like, exactly. And she's like, thank you, by the way. And later on when Alice breaks into she ended up digging her way through and ended up in the same room as them. And it's like, what are you going to, don't tell me you're going to sing again. And it's like, really? Stop shitting on my voice. And you have Sam be like, it's not that big of a deal. Especially later on because Sherry shows up later on and it's like, whoa, Alice was like, I won't let anyone insult her singing voice. And it's like, and then Lady Ramkin's like, really? But it's okay to shit on my singing voice. He's like, I really don't think this time. She's like, no, I just don't appreciate the double standard. And then you got freaking Sherry showing up fabulous and fucking killing it, summoning the darkness. And I love that like Angela and Carrot are like background dancers. I was like, dude, I love this. And she's even using like Lady Ramkin's singing voice to battle them. And it's like, what's happening? What's going on? I love the whole scene. I was like, this is so good. I love it. But when it's all said and done, it does set up some interesting things where it's like, well, for one, Carrot brought up something I brought up last episode. He was thinking like, oh, maybe this explains. For him, he's like, oh, I feel special. I am something special because it's like, yeah, the future. And Angle was like, well, what about us? And he was like, what? She's just like, what about us? And looks, and it's like, oh, right. He's like, because he was thinking like, us, like you and me? Oh, no. Yeah, he didn't really say anything. The only person obviously he mentioned was Carrot and Sam. But I love the whole thing of like, it's like maybe this is why I wasn't affected at the lake. And that's what I brought up last episode. I was like, that is interesting that he is literally the only one who wasn't affected. But Angle rebuttal kind of makes sense too, because it's like, well, maybe that's because amongst all of us, you're the only one that's not messed up. He was like, is that a compliment? So test his blood and everything. It's like, yeah. And turns out he's normal, which I guess for Carrot, he always felt kind of like the outsider because he's like, I guess amongst everyone, he's kind of the most normal of them, considering, especially because it's like, well, I'm not a dwarf. I'm actually a human that was raised by, so, but he feels like, because I think if he felt like he was special, he felt like probably him and Angela could connect more, but because she's, yes, like, because he said it last episode, like he is more than a human, just like she's more than a wolf. But I think it's just a thing of like, if I was something special and, maybe it made me feel a little bit better about me potentially being with Angela. Like it made me feel like we're kind of on even standings because she's special and I'm special. But also like, I think for him, it would have justified for him, it's like, oh, I will be the great destiny because the way Carson was talking about it, it's like, you're kind of the main reason why eventually you make captain and you're the reason why you're part of the reason why the watch kind of becomes what it becomes. So he was like, and I love the only thing Carrot took from it. Wait, I become captain, So at the end of the day, it's like because I brought it up like regardless of him being like royalty or not, he still did bring about the change. Like he still was in a situation of him popping up did change everything when it came to the watch. So he did have an effect in his own right. So I guess that's what's kind of important. I guess it's much later on in the timeline where we see Lady Rampkin and Sam together. I guess that's in the time frame where Carrot is taken over. Maybe like by then Sam is kind of retired. Maybe that's what they're kind of insinuating. But it still makes you wonder, maybe Anguia might have just been right, that maybe because he isn't the one that's messed up, but he has his own issues, but maybe they're not as, I don't know, maybe he isn't royal, maybe there is something special about him that he just doesn't know yet, like, kind of reminds me, I made reference to this recently, but it kind of reminds me, it could be like Misfits, because for such a long time during the first season, Nathan's like, what's my power? Because he could never figure out what his power was, considering everyone else around him figured out what their powers were. So it might be something similar in that regard of like, I don't know what makes me special, but it might not be to the end of the season that he finds out what makes him special. We'll see. But it's like, if Carrot's not the one with the artifact in his blood, then who is it? And I'm like, could it be Sam? Maybe that's why he's so special, so important. Maybe not. But then we also had that situation, coinciding like with Wants and Carcer in the future, and it's like, wait, who is she? And even Carcer being like, wait, you don't know who she is? I thought you knew everything. No, we observe everything. Doesn't mean we know everything. And she like Wants is like praising them and being like, I can just tell that you are unknowingly intelligent or something like that. And it's like, all right, she could stay. All she had to do was stroke their ego. But for them, it's all about changing everything because it seems like it's this wrinkle in all of space and time that Sam always leads to, like, changes and gets with Lady Rampkin, and that eventually sparks the change that eventually leads to the watch growing and inspiring others. So their thing is like, well, we're going to have to basically find the worst version of Sam and have him kill Lady Rampkin, because that will kind of kickstart everything. So if you can break what seems like to be like across every multiverse, it seems like that's something that always happens. So if you can find a universe where we can get him that cross that line and kill Lady Rampkin, then the ripple effects might be enough to shift everything, Because you would think with the multiverse thing. But I guess because it's such a integral thing across multiple multiverses that if you change it in one multiverse, I guess it's such a almost like solidified abnormality that if you abnormify that abnormality, then it might have the ripple effects. You would think whatever reality it is would only take effect in that reality, that dimension, and not like it wouldn't ripple out to the rest of the multiverse. But I guess it's like depending on the severity and how crucial of a moment it is, which I guess him and Lady Rampkin getting together is the abnormality that is so important that I guess it is such a focal thing that it will ripple across. It's just interesting to think about. Which at the same time, we have like Sam, present day, trying to protect Skimmer from, it's like, well, the Assassin's Guild isn't here anymore, but he still has to worry about Lady Rampkin because for him, he had said it before, it's like, you said that we are the last line, that we can't cross it. You're the one that drew the line, so handing him over to them to be killed, she's like, but I'd rather do that because if we leave him in this room, I'm going to be the one to kill him. So it's going to be interesting to see whether that kind of butting of heads at the end right there is going to be tied to this other Sam that we found about, like, we found the worst Sam Vimes, and what that, like, will that entail just going to that universe, having him killing Rampkin, or will we pull that Sam Vimes out from his universe and pop him into this one, pretending to be this universe of Sam Vimes and having him killing Lady Rampkin? I'm wondering, is that kind of what they're insinuating? I think it's that, but, we'll wait and see. But I'm very interested to see where this all takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.